Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Good morning. That's going to be week number 7 on our class of Ministry Practicum, Biblical Christian Ministry. It's theory and practice. And we are discussing what is ministry and who the ministers are, and how do we do a work of ministry. And those are the subjects of this class. And we have okay, this is where we left off last week, and we'll continue on these topics regarding the terms and concepts of Christian ministry, which again would be pretty much the same for any other religious work. If we are working as a minister in a temple or in a mosque, in a church, it doesn't matter. The principles are the same. So we are learning how do we do the work, and to understand the Christian ministry. Again, it is important to define exactly what we are talking about when we use a certain terms or certain vocabularies regarding the ministry. So we were discussing how do we distinguish between certain ministers, and this is what we discussed last week. Just a review: vocational, licensed, or non-licensed, and then there is a formal training and informal training. You are trained formally or informally, and you can be ordained, giving the authority, hands over your head, and then authorized officially to be a minister. Or you can work as a minister without any ordination, or you can work full-time, or you can work part-time. So it depends on. Then you can be paid, or you can do the ministry or the work in the church as a volunteer, which basically you're not paid. Sometimes volunteers are paid some money for the traveling, and then gas money, or what we call in English gas money. But that doesn't consider it as paid. And I told you about in a church, Christian church, especially the Protestant churches, usually you don't call this payment as salary, like in business, in a company, if you work and you're going to get weekly or monthly salaries. But in a church, we are not being paid salaries, but we are being paid as honorarium, which is a very different concept. That's why in the U.S. at least, they do not get the tax out of honorarium as a tax-free. So that's kind of difference we have. So we are being paid honorarium, which is a kind of a compensation, but with a respect, and it's not like you're paying certain money for your work. That's not the way it works. Okay, then clergy and lay. Clergy are vocational, professional ministers who are working in a church, and usually they are officially ordained, and they are called clergy. So when the government or people ask what your job is, your vocation is, I would check on clergy. Compared to that, lay people are not the professional. They are not paid. They are volunteers, and they have no official position in a church other than a deacon or elders. Those are not like a paid position, and they are called lay ministers. And in America, at least in Asian context, least I can speak of Asian context. There are, the Asian churches would want to have more clergy, paid professional, official ministers, because, in Asian context, it's very positional culture. So unless you have a position, you do not automatically or have respect. So the position and respect kind of goes side by side. That's why many Asian churches would have the clergy or ministers who are officially named. So we do have a certain positions. So that means we have less lay ministers. But in Western context, especially in North America, in the States, right here, we encourage to have more lay ministers than professional paid ministers. So that's kind of a cultural difference that you need to understand. Okay, next item, individual and organizational. Again, we spoke of there are those individuals who are working solely privately and have no official association with a named organization. That's the individual ministers. On the contrary, we have institutional or organizational ministers who are the members of a given organization. Usually it's a church or the mission agencies and so on. Then inreach and outreach. We have two different ministries depending on the domain of the work. So this is a basic paradigm for any church people. If you're a Christian, you belong to a church, and then there's the context or the area or domain that is outside the church. So if you're trying to do work within the church, that's inreach. And then if you go out to the world, to the ministry, the work that is done in the world or in the outside the church, we call outreach. So that's kind of a term that we use in a Christian context or in a church to kind of divide. Is it the work is the ministry or work is done within the church or outside the church? So that's kind of very distinction, and not only the ministers, but each and every believer. If you are a Christian, you do the work in a church, and then you live 7 days a week, except a Sunday. You usually work among other people who happens to be majority of the people are not believers, not Christians. So that's still, when you're working and living and outside the church, you're still doing ministry. And that's something that you need to mind of. And me as a pastor always emphasize what you do in a church is good and important, and you need to behave nice and good in a church, and everyone does. But the same principle, same attitude has to be done outside the church as well. Because, for example, in Korean churches, what the problem with the Korean churches we face today in 21st century in South Korea or the Korean churches in America, many so-called Christians, the believers or church members, they behave nice and good in the church, but when they are outside the church, they become just different person, live just same as any other non-believers. This is a very critical thing, and that's why the Korean churches has shrunk and got small and even criticized by the people outside the church. And still, some pastors even teach and encourage that kind of attitude, but that's not biblical. Either you're in a church or outside the church, believers and ministers, we need to be the same. So that's called integrity of a believer. And if you're being good in church but not being good outside the church, we call them hypocrites. So we don't want the hypocrites, and Jesus was very against these hypocrites, because the typical hypocrites in the time of Jesus was Pharisees, and these Pharisees are very known hypocrites, and Jesus criticized them and then even used the swearing words against them. So we need to understand that. Now, continuing with the distinctions in ministry and ministers, trying to understand how we differentiate each different ministers in a Christian church. There are two very important works done within the church. So in a church, two kind of major works or the responsibility or ministries are done within a church. This is a very important to have the concept. This is what we call ministry paradigm. And many Christians don't have these kind of paradigm. Even the pastors, some pastors don't have the idea. They are so confused and mixed. And we need to make a clear distinction between two different works that is done in a church. One is administration work. Because a church is a human organization as much as it is a spiritual entity. So if you're a church, a local church, denominational church, a gathering or congregation, whatever you name it, when people gather together as a group, there's always need to manage and control and sustain certain organization or group of people, and that is called administration. Whether it's a government or whether it's a school, whether it's a company, any group of people kind of get together as an entity or institution, we need management. And then management is called administration. Same for the church. Even though church is a spiritual entity, still, it's a human gathering. When human gathers and imperfect human gathers, there is always an issue. And there is a need for taking care of the group, not individuals, but a whole group, as a group. And that's administration. And if you're a pastor of a church or any level of ministers in a church, then you need to have understanding regarding administration of church. Some churches become very confused and problematic because they do not have the expertise or gift or focus or acknowledging the need of administration. So poor administration means poor ministry. Some believe administration, you can pray and forget about it, and God can, because God is God of everything, and when you believe God, you believe God's going to do some automatic things in the church. That's not how it works. God wants you to work, because God has given us the talent and gifts and resources and time and energy to use. You don't just sit and pray and forget about it and God somehow magically work the things out. That's not how it works in Christian life. The same for the church. So the church need to be managed, need to be administrated. So the work of administration is not number one, but it is a secondary important work in a church. So the question, what is the primary work of the church? Is called edification. That's a very, probably the $5 words. And another word is a discipleship, making a disciple, giving a birth to a believer and helping to nurture that believer and helping that believer to become more mature and eventually becoming a full-grown adult believer. So not the age-wise, but spiritually adult believer. So that process, giving the birth and then nurturing and helping them be trained and then helping them to become, again, a leader who, again, making another disciple. So it's a kind of cycle repeats itself. Being born and then being nurtured. Let me give up. So, you need to be born again as a believer and become a young baby Christian. Then you nurture them, give the milk, and then, feed them, take care of, changing diapers, just like you grow a baby. Then give them proper training. Then eventually help them to make a full commitment and as a mature Christian. So that's a process that repeats itself, and that's called discipleship or edification or spiritual enforcement So, I mean, there are different languages and terms that are used for the concept. Sometimes you use the word sanctification. That's in the Bible. So, when you see these words, and then grow and mature, sanctify, edify, these are the concepts of maturing in belief and the work. So that's actually the fundamental and the primary, number one word of a church. So if you are a minister of a church, that means you are doing this work. Okay, let me have that attendance sheet. Okay. You guys sign, everyone sign? Please make sure that you sign as you come in. So continuing with the concept, 2 words that need to be done in a church. See, this concept is you can apply the same thing for your family at home. To run a family, to become a mom and dad in a family, you need to have this management plus growing your children. If you own a company, and sometimes you will, this land is a land of opportunity, and you are allowed to have your own company and be a boss. So if let's say you're running a company or a small shop, even a small shop, if you're working as a single, employee and then owner, still, even with the one person, it does take administration plus the work of, the job to fulfill the task of, earning money. So these 2 dimensions or the work area are common in any group of people that we gather together for a certain reason and purpose. Even those groups that are aiming to do for the hobbies or the common interest group that you kind of enjoy together as a group, it also needs the management as well. So the administration or management is secondary, but it is also necessary. You cannot do without having the ability to management. Again, I told you, many churches ignore or do not see the importance of this administration. Administration is very key to having a successful ministry. So if you are a minister of a church who are in the leadership position, it is very important and necessary to have this gift and perspective and the training for administration. The thing is, when you go to let's say if you're going to a seminary, which like I have trained, usually it's a 3 years training to become a vocational professional minister. And what I see from the this seminary curriculum, they do not have zero training on the administration perspective, or just one class regarding the administration of church, which is very unbalanced, I would say. I'm sure we should have more of this management perspective in a seminary curriculum added and focused and emphasized. Next, domestic versus cross-cultural. That is a kind of concept that you need to have when we are speaking of mission, or what we usually called in the old days, overseas mission. The term overseas mission meaning that you go to overseas or cross the seas. So this is like let's say England. England was known as a Christian nation, Christian country, until the early 19th century, or late 19th century. And England was the one country that has sent many missionaries to Africa and South Africa and Asia and so on. For example, the Korea had this first English missionary in the late 18th century, and American missionaries as well. So these are the so-called missionaries, are the ones who cross the sea to go to other countries, and that is called, today it's called cross-cultural. Not anymore as a, you're going across the sea, but across the culture. So that's how we name today the cross-cultural ministry or cross-cultural mission. That's what we used to call overseas mission or overseas ministry, where you go to another country where the culture is totally different, and you kind of settle down there, learn the language, learn the culture, and do the work of evangelizing, meaning sharing the gospel, telling the gospel, and then translating the Bible. These are the kind of works. And then sometimes you provide the food, and then you build the hospitals and so schools. These are the basic ministries that are done for so-called underdeveloped countries, as the missionaries go there and serve. So those are called cross-cultural or overseas ministry. And then domestic ministry is what is done within the culture that you are familiar with. If you're doing the church work in your own countries, whether it's China, Vietnam, Korea, any other countries, it's called domestic, because you are working with your people, the culture that you're familiar with. So that's kind of concept that divide ministers by the work. Are you working in a culture that you're familiar with and the people that you're familiar with, or are you working with the people who are very different from you culturally, socially, ethnically? And then when that happens, it's called cross-cultural ministry. Now, so because it's a cross-cultural ministry, you don't need to necessarily go to another country. You can do cross-cultural ministry even in the States. So let's say me as a Korean American, if I'm working in a Chinese American church, for example, that becomes a cross-cultural ministry as well. So that's kind of cultural paradigm concept for ministry. Okay. Then next, the distinction of the minister or ministries is whether particular or generic. The pastors, usually pastor of the church, if you're a senior pastor in a church, for example, you're doing what we call generic ministry. You do almost everything. You do like a visits, you sick visits, or you lead a wedding ceremony, and you do the funerals, and you preach on Sundays, and you lead Bible studies, and so everything that you need to do everything regarding the ministry. So that's a generic ministry, all included. And there are ministers who are doing like a particular work. For example, we did divide administration and edification. Some ministers in the church are very specialized and focused on the administration only. Some leaders are so-called praise leaders. Their job is very particular, and they lead praise, Sunday praise, or Wednesday night worship praise in front of the whole congregation, and some may play guitar, some may play drums, and they work as a so-called praise team to lead the Sunday morning worship praise. So those are examples of so-called particular ministry. So that's kind of a distinction. And if you have a very special talent or gift as a minister, you can do praise, you can do artwork, or you can design and make the video clips that played on Sunday worship, and so on. So those are examples, again, of particular ministry. So you either do particular ministry or generic ministry, and both are important. Okay, continuing. Now, structures for ministry. So once you know and they have the concept how to distinguish and divide each different ministers. Now, I told you about the administration, and the part of administration knowledge has to do with how do you structure your church? How do you organize your church in a certain given structure so it works the best? That kind of suggests not every churches are the same, which means, again, every church, local churches are different. They have a different culture, they have different members, they have different denominations, they have different doctrines, and most of all, different people. So when you have different people with the different needs or different constructions or complexions, then you would have a very different structure or way of organizing it. So how do we organize a group, whether it's a church or a mosque or a temple, or even the family? That's one of the things that we do as people, because we are people of grouping or gathering. So it is important to understand when you try to do the ministry, especially if you're trying to become a pastor of a particular local church, or the leader of a certain Christian organization or agencies, then you need to understand this very term, which the church itself does not teach this. So this is a good opportunity if you're a Christian and believer. You need to have this very good knowledge on this. Number one, distinction. This is a kind of old concept, but let me begin with this old concept of church and parachurch. In the development in 19th and 20th century in the English, not I wouldn't say European, but English churches and North American churches, as they begin to have this very rise of so-called mission agencies. Mission agencies are again those agencies who are working to promote and manage and extend and build a overseas missions works. So there is a very the era about 100 to 200 years of period where the Protestant churches, even the Catholic churches, both Catholic and Protestant churches were very focused on overseas missions. There's several reasons that has to do with the expansion of the missions. That's another subject. But with the many political, geopolitical, and social reasons behind the work in overseas cross-cultural ministry has grown very fast. And what happened is the local churches, for example, let's say you have a church that is in even the Central California. Today, Central California is pretty much developed still, but it's a farming area, which is considered rural area, the countryside. These local churches, even though their size might not be that big and that small, most rural churches in America size 100, 200 members. What happens is they want to send the missionaries, but they do not have the knowledge or expertise or the system to send away missionaries by themselves. Because of that very practical reason, these so-called agencies, like agencies today, they kind of work as a broker between the local churches and the mission field. So that kind of developed, and these agencies are not considered as church, because a church in American mind or English mind, a church is a local church, have a building and a space to worship. And these agencies, so-called mission agencies, they did not have a building or a given congregation, so they did not consider it a church. Another development that happened in this period that I'm talking about, the 18th and 19th century until the early 20th century, there's a very strong movement of students, college students, in the Oxford, Cambridge, and many of North American universities, who majority of these students at the time in these universities are Christians. Indeed, Harvard, it was Christian university at the beginning. Princeton, very famous university today, has also began as a 100% Christian university. So Cambridge and Oxford as well. So these are basically Christian institutions when they began. So the majority of students are believers and Christians. And when these students come to the college with the, very ability to learn, and then with this movement with the missionaries, it kind of clicked together. So many college, university students volunteered or committed themselves to become missionaries, overseas missionaries. And this movement grew and grew and become popular. So if you're a Christian, you would have heard the Campus Crusade for Christ, or Navigators, or University Christian Fellowship, which I was a part of. And these development among the universities in the Western world became a big movement. Hundreds and thousands of students become involved in these works of ministry. So that means these groups, so-called campus ministries, they need to kind of organize and have their own system, which is not a local church. So the church and then something that is not church, but doing the work of a ministry, that's a kind of new development, and they needed some concept. So they call them para churches. Para in English means something that is similar to, but not exactly what it is. So para church means it's just like a church. It does a ministry of a church, but it's not a church. So that's why they call them para churches. That's the early concept dividing the local church and the agencies and organization of Christian and believers, which is not a local church. So that kind of distinguish two different. I, for example, is a product of para church, not particularly local church. I was a very active member of InterVarsity called, still exists as a almost 160, 70 years old organization, and it's still going on. So the parachurch became a major player in Christian ministry. So it's kind of recognized and divided, but since it's not a local church, needed a term or concept to distinguish them and call them parachurches. Now, later on, as in the late 20th century, we introduced the term modality and synodality. That's kind of a long story, so I'll just skip on that. Basically, the modality is so-called mother organization. Synodality is like a son organization. So the local churches is usually called modality, mother structure, or mother organization, while these parachurches, now called synodality, is a product or the result of a local church members who are working outside the church but works like a church. So those are called synodality. And this modality and synodality is a sociological term. And we adopted this sociological term to describe who we are. Now, next concept. Fixed and mobile. Usually the local churches that we see with the so-called denominational churches, the churches that we belong to as a member, is fixed as in a given locality. So, for example, if you call yourself Anaheim Church, means that you're in Anaheim. Santa Ana Methodist Church, that you are located in the Santa Ana, California. These are so-called local churches, and these are fixed churches that have stationed and it doesn't move around. You come together as a church. On contrary, mobile church, it means that you move around. You go from place A to place B and continue to work not in a fixed location, but in the areas, in different areas. These so-called parachurches or sodalities, most of them are mobile churches. Mobile churches. And that they move around and go from place A to place B to work and to do the ministries. Next one. Denominational versus inter or versus non-denominational. That's another kind of concept for the local. Most local churches are denominational, but today there's a trend. Some local churches do not want to belong to a denomination, because in modern world, especially what we call MZ generation, or the young people, 20s and in their 20s and 30s, they don't care much about denomination or denominational doctrine. They don't want to be Baptist, or they want to call themselves Methodist or Presbyterian, not even Catholic or Protestant. They just want to be Christian. Because of that reason, some churches took that trend and labeled themselves to be independent church. So they do not have any denominational association. They are no longer Presbyterian, Baptist, or anything but Christian church, or the Church of Christ. They use a Church of Christ even as a denominational name. So even saying that may confuse you, but the Church of Believers or Church of Christians. That's how they want to label themselves. But still, majority of churches belong to a certain denomination, either Catholic or Protestant. That's a two big denomination in Christian church. And then when you go to, there's another one, Orthodox. So the Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, these are probably the three major denominations. And within the Protestant churches, there are different Protestant churches that have such name as Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, Congregational, and many of these denominational names. So that's again denominational. And then inter or non-denominational, independent, they do not claim they belong to a certain denomination. Okay, let us continue the second part of week number 7 on the Ministry Practicum. Okay. Continuing our discussion on the structures for ministry or ministry structures of a church. So if you're a Christian, again, there are three major denomination or distinction of Christian churches. The Roman Catholic Church, that's probably the largest denomination in the world, have several billion members, and as Catholic Church or Roman Catholic Church. Then Protestant churches with the hundreds or thousands different denominations within. So Protestant church is a name for these different denominations who basically does not belong to either Catholic or Orthodox church. Then Orthodox church, usually it's a very old church system, probably older than the Catholic, most of them older than the Catholic churches. There's like a Russian Orthodox or Egyptian Orthodox churches, which has a very old organization or system of denomination. They do have a particular way of worship and particular doctrine that are a little different than either Catholic Church or Protestant churches. So these are the three major the structures or denomination globally, and within the Protestant churches there are what we call sub-denomination, and many of them. Now, synod. Synod are the how they divide a geographical area of a church, their churches or denominational churches. So it's a kind of large area of geographical distinction to have or organize their own denominational churches. So, for example, Methodists, they do use the term synod, or Congregational Church in America, they use the term synod, but not the Baptist or Presbyterian. Many Presbyterian churches do not use the word synod. Instead, Presbyterian churches, they use the term presbytery as a very the same concept, just like a synod. It covers a certain area. Let's give an example of synod. Methodist or United Methodist Church of Northern California, for example, is a synod. Covers all the churches, the Methodist or United Methodist churches in the Northern California. They become one large group under synod, and each synod would have their own sort of supervisor. There's a name for it. I just forgot. So not the deacon, not the elder, but there's a top leader that kind of responsible for the covering or being responsible for the organization of certain synod. And the same for the presbytery. Let's say presbytery of PCUSA. That's a kind of denomination name in America. Let's say PCUSA America in Southern California Presbytery. When you say that, it means all the PCUSA churches belong to this presbytery in Southern California. So that's kind of how we organize the geographical denominational churches. However, there's another thing called convention. If you're a member of Southern Baptist Church, you will be familiar with the word convention, because Southern Baptist Church, they do not consider them to be a denominational organization. Rather, they believe themselves to be the convention, or in secular term, it's a kind of association. Association is a kind of a united group that each local entity or local company or organization would keep their own independence. So each having their own independence or power or authority kind of comes together because they feel they are similar, and make and join a association. So that's kind of a structure. And Southern Baptists believe each local churches, for example, let's say the First Baptist Church of Santa Ana, they are independent authority. They have no super or upper authority other than the church themselves. They decide who they are, except what they believe. So every Southern Baptist church believe in one what we call confession of faith, and that's a doctrine. Southern Baptist doctrine, or Southern Baptist the confession of belief or confession of faith, it is one thing that kind of brings together all these so-called Southern Baptist churches. So that's how it works. It's different than a presbytery or synod, where the Catholics or Methodists have. They do have upper authority over their local churches, and they do have certain authority and power to decide. For example, they authorize who the elder is going to be, who the local pastor is going to be, and who's going to be the when they have issues within the church or problems or conflicts, this synod or the presbytery comes in. They have authority to come into the church, local churches, and exercise their authority over them. Either eliminate the pastor, or they can deny eldership, and so on. So that means they can actually involve in our local churches. So that's a kind of major difference between these churches that would have upper or hyper authority, or you don't. And that has to do with what we call polity. It's not like it's a politic, but in a church we say it's a polity, meaning how do you organize and run and manage the power of the church. The power, it kind of created when the people comes together as a group. You do have an individual right and the power and authority of your own. But when 2 or 3 or more people comes together, it creates a different level of power. And we usually call that people power. And that demands also governing or administration, as I said. So the government is an institution that kind of have the delegate of the people's power to run and to control and to manage themselves as a group. Same thing happens in a church. When people come together as a group, it creates group power or people power that need to be delegated and that need to be governed, because we are still not perfect. And so each church, whether it's a local church or a whole denomination, as the group of local churches come together, they need to have a system or culture or society to have that, what we call control or management, and that is called polity. And this is a church kind of term. Instead of politic, we use word polity to refer to how we manage and run a church. So each church or each denomination would have different polity to run their own churches or denomination. So if you belong to a church, you do have, whether we like it or not, there's a certain level and the way of a system to manage and control your own organization or church as an organization. What we call is a polity is a necessary evil, because we are evil. People are evil, even Christian people, even believers. We do still have this evil desire behind, or hidden, or suppressed. And once the Holy Spirit, you do not trust and believe in the Holy Spirit, or in another way of saying is you are not in the full of the Holy Spirit, then this evil desire, the greed and the anger and all these negative human nature kind of comes up to surface. It does rise. Sometimes you do not have control over it. Because of that nature, when we gather together, we do have conflicts among ourselves, even if you are devoted Christian. How long you have been to church, or how long you have been a believer, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It does. You do have that evil desire still kind of alive. That's like what we call Christian struggle. And it is natural and it's still biblical. I mean, the Bible does mention that we do have these problems and issues, even still as a believer, until Jesus comes back and restore the whole perfect kingdom of God. And until then we will continue to have issues and problems. And it's important to acknowledge and accept our inability or incapability or issue of these evil desires. Because of that, we do need to have authority, governing, control, management, and so on. Management is neutral, but the word control, order, these governing, actually does have that negative connotation or negative meaning behind it, meaning we need to be governed, we need to be controlled, we need to be given certain orders or ranks to manage our evil desire that may come up from time to time, and the conflict that is caused because of those greed, lust, and evil desire and sinful nature still in us. So that's why we have the term polity, and it is necessary, and we need to have that. So there's no way. I mean, some churches try to deny these elements, and that believe because we are believers because of the work and the sovereign work of the Holy Spirit, we will be automatically somehow magically and spiritually be controlled and have no need and issue for to control us or have a politics or polity. It's not realistic. It's very ideal. And there are some churches that have that way of belief, and I do not condemn them, but I do not agree personally. Okay, church orders. These are the examples how these churches, different major denomination, structure themselves as an organization or as an institution. If you're a Roman Catholic Christian, you would know better than I do. This is my just basic knowledge, and it's a common sense thing. We have Pope, the Pope or a Pope, and then it's believed to. I mean, Catholic Christians, they believe these popes have the lineage from the Apostle Peter, who has the key to the heaven, and the popes have power to either bound or release the authority on earth, which requires a different interpretation for us Protestant. But that's how they believe the Pope, and they believe the Pope has a very direct communication with God, unlike just normal lay believers. I do believe a Pope, genuine Christian, would have a direct communication with God just as much as any individual, us believers, have a direct communication with God through Jesus Christ. That's the same thing. So for me, there's no difference in understanding the Pope's communication with God compared to our communication with God. But the majority of Roman Catholic Christians believe Pope has some special way of having the direct communication with God. So that's how I think how they believe. Then under the Pope, each local ethnic or national Catholic churches, so they do have what we call national Catholic churches. For example, each countries where there's a Catholic presence, they do have national Catholic church, and each national Catholic church or a cardinal or cardinals. Then under that they would have archbishops, and then bishops, and then priests or fathers, and then deacons. So each local church, Catholic church, would have the priest or priests who are managing and having to help the local congregation, Catholic congregation. And there's the deacons and the nuns. Nuns are not included. For some reason, they are not included in the ranks that the information that I looked up, they do not include nuns, but they are not at the level of priest. I'm sure of that, but probably somewhere in the rank of deacons. Deacons, just like in the Protestant churches, the Catholic churches would have deacons. So that's Orthodox churches. Not all the Orthodox churches are the same, but basically Orthodox churches would have bishops, and then presbyters or priests in the local congregation, and then deacons, just as any other churches would have deacons. Because they have deacons because the Bible does have elders and deacons, and the presbyters. Actually, these presbyters are the modern European term for elders. So when you hear the word presbyters, just consider it as elders in the Bible. So in the Bible, there is in the Bible named pastors. There's elders, and there are deacons, and then there's a one under the thing above elders. So the bishop is a leader of these priests or presbyters. So that's kind of their rank. So compared to the Catholic polity or the structures, they have more levels of authorities, the ranks, and Orthodox churches have less the ranks. That's kind of different, but it's not necessarily to say less rank is better than more ranks, or the other way around. There's no way of determining and biblically defining or evaluating the more ranks are better. The answer is we don't know. It depends on, actually. So sometimes less of level or ranks are better, sometimes more ranks are better. So comparing Orthodox Church and Catholic Church, which is a better because of the ranks, the answer is it's not necessarily relevant. Then Protestant churches. Usually most Protestant churches would have pastor or pastors who are usually the vocational and paid and professional clergy members of a church. Then we have elders and the deacons. And one thing that I want to let you know is a pastor is one of the elders, and that's biblically that's who he is. But in many Asian Protestant churches, Christian churches, they have kind of idea pastors are above the elders, and many pastors do believe that they are above other elders who are not pastors, because the elders are not paid; they are volunteers. They are the actually one of the lay people compared to clergy people who are professional paid pastors. Because you are preaching in front of the congregation every Sunday, that used to not be the practice in the older churches. In early churches, any elders who are elders are able to come and have that duty and responsibility to preach in front of the congregation. So those who will graduate seminary and have ordination, and those are the only ones who is able to preach in front of the congregation on Sunday service. that's kind of is a modern invention. So in USA and Canada, there's a denomination, it's called Brethren Churches. These Brethren Churches, they do have elders or sometimes deacons come to the front and on Sundays, and they do preach. And some Brethren churches I've been to, they do not have designated preacher for that particular Sunday. They come to church and they pray, and whoever has the feeling or conviction that Holy Spirit is leading for him or her, usually him, in the Brethren churches, him to preach that Sunday, he comes up to the front and begin preaching. So that's kind of different practice than most Presbyterian churches that we know. So that means each different churches have different way of having their worship or the organization or making the structures and so on. So the Bible does not have a fixed idea about how we position the church leaders in a certain way. It just gives a big a guideline. So that's how we should understand. Other ministry terms, continuing the terms and the concepts in a Christian ministry: the role, order, discipline, and rituals. The order of a church, we do have, each church or denomination have what we call constitution. Just like America or any countries would have their constitution, which is the very fundamental of the law or laws. So your law or laws are built up under the Constitution. Constitution is very philosophical, it is doctrinal. So any denomination or church that you would have, you should have, you do have this Constitution of your church. And we abide by that Constitution, and that's a very primary order. And then each local churches would have what we call bylaws. So the Constitution is the highest authority of the code and order. Then under the Constitution, you would have bylaws. Each church have different bylaws, but you cannot go against Constitution. Just like any political government, the Constitution is the final. You cannot have any laws that is different from or against or conflict with the Constitution. So when you're making final judgment on anything that you did, whether it's criminal or not, it goes back to Constitution, and it is the same thing in a church. So that means if you're a believer or in a certain church or denomination, then you need to know the Constitution and then bylaws. So that's how we manage order in a church. So if anything happens, then need to be determined or decided or make a judgment of, then we go by bylaws and constitution. But we need to remember anything or everything that says in the constitution and by law has to be determined by the Bible. Anything or everything cannot be beyond or against the Bible. This is a very important. So today we do have in the church have issues like probably the most prevailing and the common issue that you have in modern, at least in the North American church, I would say, is I think there are two matters that matter. One is regarding the abortion or birthright or the reproduction right. That's how they say today, these days. So is abortion biblical or not? And some churches struggle with that, and they try to include abortion rights or abortion as within in the Constitution or bylaws. Another thing that has to do with the so-called LGBTQ issues. So that is very controversial today, even in the church. It's no longer a political issue, but it's a very religious issue. And even among the Christians, they would have very different opinions regarding these issues. And there are many other social, cultural issues that are relevant to these bylaws and the Constitution. If you're a believer, is a racism, is that biblical? That can be debated. I mean, still, even in America, that's still debated. So, what does it mean to be politically correct as a believer? That's again an issue of the because any local church or churches are within a given government or state under all these churches, even in America. It's not just churches in some very persecution countries or the countries who have politics or the policies against churches, but even in America, we do have this issue, stated versus churches. It's still going on. It's not the issue that has been resolved and done. Because of that, the so-called socio-political or socio-cultural issues always, not many times, it always becomes this issues under the state or a church. There's nothing like a church only issue or state only issue. That's why we struggle between so-called state versus church. So the church, because we are in the world, we are under the government authorities, there's always this tension between the church and the state, the world and the church. And how you settle that is named in the Constitution and by laws. And the thing is, how do you understand and interpret the Bible? So it all comes down to understanding and interpreting and applying the Bible. So, I mean, whichever your position is, the Bible is the key, and that's the most important thing to understanding your ministry and the church and the work and so on. Discipline. Unless you have this constitution and bylaws, you will not be able to manage your church when the things happen. And things does happen, whether you want it or not, whether you like it or not. If you're a church, a local church, the things happen. And you need to address those things, problems, issues, conflicts, tensions, and then even different understanding of Bible, different interpretation of Bible, and different doctrines. These are all things that are always there to cause problems. And then we need to address that. You cannot say nothing and be silent. If you do that, the church is no longer a church. So either you're a pastor or deacon or elder or any sort of leadership in a church, then you need to be aware of what your constitution says and what your bylaw says. And if you don't agree with this constitution or bylaws, you cannot do pretty much nothing about constitution, because there's many different churches that kind of agree on. So it is almost impossible to change constitution unless you become one of the representatives that is sent to the synod or presbytery, and you exercise your vote. And so the local church leaders, but you wouldn't be able to do something with the bylaws. You can either change more toward the biblical understanding, or if you don't like, only way to do as a believer, as a leader, as a minister, is to just come out of the church and find a church that kind of you agree with, instead of making troubles. But as we have experienced, I have experienced in many of the Korean American churches that I was with, and then other churches that I was not with, people, the believers, they try to make their agenda work and try to change these things, because they do have a choice to go to another church that they can agree with. So the discipline, in case there are those who are keep making trouble and teaching some different doctrines and so on, when these things happen, you need to address and deal with these issues, and that's called discipline. So some people say, if a church is a church, Jesus taught to love everyone, even enemies. That does not mean that you need to keep certain order and discipline in your church, because Jesus also taught us about the discipline. And then Apostle Paul, he said, if there's an issue, first thing, you go quietly, silently, without letting others know, and you as a leader, go to speak to that sister or brother and make a point according to the Bible, not your own idea or feelings or preference. That's something that you need to avoid. But according to the Bible, you tell that person with the love, which is right according to the Bible, which is wrong according to the Bible. And let him or her know that. So that's the first step. Then if he or she does not listen, then you kind of ask other leaders, couple of them, and go together and do it again, second time. And hope and pray, says St. Paul, that he or she will repent and come back to the biblical norm. If that doesn't happen, third step, let the whole church know of the situation and address that, and have it can be a vote or making consensus according to your order and discipline, and then deal with it. So that means even at the Paul's time, which is a very early, because Paul wrote the Romans and other epistles within the 100 AD, which means it's only like a 30 years after Jesus ascended or resurrected. So only in church history, already there has been many different issues regarding or needed to be disciplined. And Paul tells them this is how it should be done. And if you're a minister in a church, first thing that you need to be very careful not to be the subject of disciplining yourself. That's number one thing. Then as a leader, even though you may not like it, there comes the time, very often actually, time that you need to make that decision of disciplining some of your own congregation, especially when you're a leader in a local church. That happens a lot. And it's very difficult decision to make. Sometimes, the worst case that you need to excommunicate. That's a Catholic word, but no, you kick out some church members. And that's most extreme case, but that does happen, and that's a part of doing discipline. And if you do not discipline your believer congregation, it's just like you are not disciplining your own child. When you do not make a proper discipline of your own child, he or she is going to be a nuisance. So same thing happens in a church. So when you need to make that decision, you need to make it, you need to do it. So that's something that I emphasize a lot, because many leaders or ministers are too good. It's like a good child complex. You have heard of it. A good child complex. You need to be good to everyone in every situation. That's not what the reality is. So you cannot be good, in secular terms, but you need to be good in biblical terms, and we need to make a discipline when it's necessary. Rituals. If you're a minister, especially a pastor, you need to know how to lead funerals, how to do the baptism, how to lead a wedding, and so on. There are these rituals that you need to learn and perform and exercise. And not only the pastors, but also the deacons and elders have their own part and responsibility regarding these rituals. Rituals are like a wedding, funerals, the baptism, and then communion. These are some of the major rituals that happens in a church. Continuing the understanding other terms, right and responsibility. Those who are working in Asian churches, I'm not sure about all the Asian churches, but the Asian churches that are influenced by the Confucius philosophy and ideals, especially in Korea, the Joseon dynasty, which 500 years sustained. Out of those 500 years, most of those 500 years are under the ideal of this Confucius philosophy, which basically says you respect elders and then kings and submit yourself with this what we call humble attitude, which is actually depersonalizing yourself, which means basically you don't have any rights as a person, as a human being, if you're in a certain level of so-called the lower class, which because of that philosophy and ideal and education, when you are in the church, you have still the same mentality. It's not so much of those who are the congregation members, but the leaders, usually the pastors, they exercise authority just as the Confucius philosophy teaches the culture, which is not biblical. That's one of the major issues, especially in the Korean American churches here. The second generation Korean Americans cannot understand their authoritarian kind of one way of exercising authority and not giving any authority to the members, only asking for them for their responsibility. So this kind of disagreement between the right and responsibility does happen in many churches, which is a Asian American context, and then also in Asian churches, because the Bible does teach right and responsibility goes hand in hand. Okay, thank you for your attention, and please make sure that you sign out, making sure that you're under. Okay, announcement. We do not have a class next week because it's a Veterans Day. Then the week following, 18th, we have final class. So just one more class. We don't have class in the Thanksgiving week. So just one more class to come.